Well, I know a lot of you guys said that maybe I was jumping the gun, but it seems history proves otherwise when it comes to this. CMON has given up. It's looking really bad. They made an announcement finally, not about their finances, though you can bet it's going to be really bad too. I'll cover that as well. But additionally, there was an article that was posted that made some claims that were very inaccurate. It was a very strong worded article, and it reminds me of maybe a few things I did a few years ago when I would jump the gun a bit too much. So I'll talk through that, and hopefully a well-reasoned, kind of sounded, like grounded person. And so we'll go over that as well, because it does prove some things quite well while also making several mistakes. So I'll go over that as well. Suffice it to say, though, guys, it's not looking great for some of these companies. Some of the companies are okay, some are not. I'm going to tell you even which ones are and aren't. So yeah, just stay tuned. All right, so last video I commented about Into the AM and how awesome they are when they make shirts just like this, of course, which are great. But I didn't have some of the shirts that I wanted to show you off. So here's a quick video, real quick, of one of the shirts I'm going to be showing off. So the other one will come in a future video. We'll get to that later. It's fantastic. I wore it all day. Really, really comfy. They're fantastic. You can save 10% with the link in the description below using my code. So feel free to do that. Okay. Now, with this CMON announcement, let's just read through it. I'm going to read through the whole thing, but I do have some highlights. So it says, an update on our internal teams and company focus. Our CMON community means a lot to us, so we felt it was important to share with you some difficult decisions of our company today. I'm actually going to stop right there. Back to full screen me. That is obviously BS. CMON has a history, and I have several videos covering this, including one called CMON is Evil, which, again, strongly worded, I know, but I'm talking about the purposeful manipulation, keeping backers ignorant, not telling them all the information, and there are times where we've only found information because there was a leak, and then it was covered by people like me, and then they finally actually announce something, or they'll purposely announce things the day after, or they'll lie and say things are limited when they're not, and do some, manipulating games there. They were very early on in the FOMO thing. One of their use of FOMO is practically the horse armor. If you're into the new Oblivion, by the way, hope you're having fun with the remaster, but you probably know how microtransactions are normal now in video games, and that mostly came from, I think, the $3, $2 horse armor from Oblivion that you could lose if your horse died. It was a big thing then, and CMON in a lot of ways shaped what the crowdfunding board game space is now. And so if you're seeing general problems or general trends that are difficult to deal with, you can actually blame CMON for a lot of those. So they are very much not focused on that. I've even covered how, like, their CEO in the past has talked about how he doesn't care about you as a person or your sob story, anything like that. All he wants to know is about your game. It's all business. It's the people aren't important, right? And so that's BS, but sure, we'll go ahead. Okay, sorry, tangent there. Given global conditions, and most notably the situation with tariffs, so highlighting here, they are blaming specifically tariffs here, okay? So just as an FYI, we're going to talk about those in a little bit. CMON has decided to focus on our current commitments to our customers and partners. Now, this is also interesting. They say customers and partners. They do not say backers. Now, I don't know exactly how much care they're putting into that, but if you call us a customer, customers have certain rights, backers do not. Right? Partners have certain rights. Investors have certain rights. Backers is a made-up word. It's kind of like selling something diet and calling it light, L-I-T-E, but because it's like a misspelling, people think it means one thing, but it can mean whatever you say it means, right? That kind of thing. That's what's going on here. So customers and partners. I don't even know if that includes me. They have hundreds of dollars of mine for board games that I'm waiting on, and I'm not sure they're including me in customer and partner, but we'll see. We'll see. And prioritize the timely delivery of existing projects. So that does make it seem, assuming that when they say projects, they're not talking about their internal projects like retail initiatives and stuff like that. They're talking about their campaigns. So again, they're using words that are very odd to me when these things have very common agreed upon words. Backers and campaigns. Instead, there's customers and projects. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm already kind of hesitant that this actually means much of anything. I think it's very carefully worded, very purposefully worded. But let's move on. So effective immediately, we will be pausing all future game development. All future game development. Now, I don't know what... Again, maybe I'm reading into this a little bit, if it means like current development, if there was one ready and now they're not. I think it means just they're not launching another campaign on crowdfunding. And new crowdfunding campaigns. Actually, okay, so they're actually like even separating the two here. Again, very carefully worded. Until trade conditions have stabilized. Now, what that means, I don't know, because, like, how long to stabilize? Was it stabilized between the freight issue that they had, where there wasn't enough freight containers to go around, so they were really expensive, and now it's a tariffs thing? Or was it when there was COVID, and you couldn't get stuff into warehouses properly, or shipping them off, and there was port closures, and all? Like, what does that mean? What does it even look like? I don't know. It's ambiguous. Unfortunately, this involves extremely difficult staffing decisions affecting all of our creative teams with reductions. Reductions, again, very carefully worded. The company's just trying not to say we fired a whole bunch of people. I understand the wordplay, I understand the legalese around that. I'm not worried about that at all. I.e., people are losing their jobs. You can call that whatever you want, but I know what they would call it. We did not make this choice lightly, and our thoughts are with everyone impacted. We are incredibly grateful for their roles and our success over the years, and these talented people will be missed both professionally and personally. I don't know about the personally thing. I don't know who wrote this. Obviously not the CEO. But maybe somebody that cares did actually write that. I'm not sure. But the professionally, obviously, they hired them and paid them for a reason, right? They liked what they produced. So this is really unfortunate because it parallels Mythic Games almost to a T. I'm looping back again. I already spent a whole year doing this 2 years ago, covering all these closures, covering all the lies, covering all the, like, we're telling you we're sorry, but then we are acting differently, stuff like that, right? You might recall, okay, so I'll actually do the parallel for you. We have known, I already have a video out days ago about CMON being in trouble, right? That's been an obvious thing. They were taken off the stock exchange. They haven't, even to this day, put out their finances, right? So, like, they've obviously been in an issue and have not said anything to us. No backer, no customer, no partner. Well, maybe they're partners. I don't know. The businesses, I guess. They haven't come to us, but now they're like, oh, hey guys, like we really feel this is important, right? We want to take care of you. We just didn't tell you that there was an issue until well after the issue. At my work, we have problems like everything else, right? We work through those problems. That's pretty much why we're paid. And sometimes an incident happens and we have to write an incident report. And that incident report doesn't come a month later. It doesn't come when it's all resolved and everything's hunky-dory, right? You communicate that out quite promptly, right? As quickly as you can. Because it's important to notify people, hey, something happened, right? They were not in too much of a rush to tell you anything. And even now, they haven't told anybody their finances. You can't tell me that, like, the math takes longer, right? Like it's not like the accountant like got a case of the flu and there's no other accountants, to do it. And nobody's like, I don't know what a calculator is, right? Like, they have their profits and losses, they have their books, they're just not sharing them, right? Which is why they were taken off the stock exchange, and eventually they will. But not anytime soon, not right now, right? And the only reason they produce that is because they're publicly traded. If they're not publicly traded anymore, you ain't going to see any financial report from them, right? These companies do not share their information. Mythic Games did the exact same thing. There were some rumblings, there were some issues, there was some concerns with Mythic Games, and they said nothing, and they said nothing, and they said nothing, and they would tell us, oh, hey, we're struggling, but we're going to do this. So, and only at the very end did we really truly find out how bad things were, right? This is the same thing. You are going to be the last person to know. You watching this, unless you're one of their business partners, an investor, somebody that has rights, you're not going to know. You're just not, right? So we're not going to know. It's very parallel to that, where it's just bad news. We know things are bad, but we ain't being told nothing. And then we get little leaks, little hints, little drips for stuff like this. One of the reasons this was communicated is because those people won't stay quiet, obviously, right? I'm sure there's probably NDAs. Companies love to do that sort of thing, right? Sign here, say nothing. I remember I had one for a company that I worked for where to get any sort of severance package at all, I had to essentially say I would never say anything bad about them. Like, and obviously they don't necessarily care about little old me saying things, but that's in their back pocket, and there's always that threat of lawsuit, right? If you ever say anything, like, it's silly, right? These companies are garbage. Now, I'm not saying CMON is that bad, right? I worked for a Fortune 50 tech company, so it was, a much larger company than CMON. But either way, there's going to be rumblings. People are going to be posting their LinkedIn, right? They're going to be looking for a job. You can't keep it quiet, so they've only told you anything because they couldn't keep it quiet anymore, because they had to let them go, and after that, they have less control over those people saying anything, doing anything, which means now, obviously, we would find out either way, so they're now trying to control that message. So that's what's going on here. The only reason we know is because they fired people. If they hadn't, we would still have no communication from CMON. But let's go ahead to an article that I think is kind of interesting. This is on the Board Game Wire. And what they noted here was CMON currently has 10 yet to deliver crowdfunding projects, which raised more than $22 million. So they have taken $22 million of our dollars, and they have given zero back of that $22 million right now. And what they're saying is it's gonna be a tight ship, but we're gonna try to get you that back. There's a reason why it's not a one and done thing. There's a reason why there might be some issues here. And that's where I'm going to cover this other article. So this is going to be something, there's a lot of noise here I'm trying to cancel out because I'm trying to give you the nuggets of truth here, or good points or things that I want to highlight. So I'm going to show the article. Just know that a lot of the article I don't agree with, I think is wrong. I think some parts are right, though. And I don't want to have a poor delivery kill an entire message, if that makes sense. So this is the board game industry is burning, and it's their own fault. Yes and no, not really for the reason he's necessarily saying. This is by one of the creators of the High Noon is the game company here. And I'll link down everything down below, okay? So there's a lot here, right? And well, the one thing I'm going to say here is this highlight here. They are not victims of tariffs. I don't necessarily agree with that. They are victims of their own incompetence. That I will agree with. I'm going to read some quotes here, where I'm coming from on this. I've said this in many videos in the past, so you guys know I've been pretty consistent with this, especially during the whole Mythic games and Blacklist games and all those kind of things, right, when all that was going down. For the most part, the people in this industry are hobbyists that sometimes turn into business people or try to balance it or try to gain that skill. I have spoken with many devs that started out just making games. They were just hobbyists and have had to learn or tried to learn global law, right, when it comes to delivering things. I have seen personal receipts, actual things that say do not share, right? So I'm not going to like dive into that, and you can trust me or not, I guess, but like they have, under anonymity, whatever, they're anonymous, been like, hey, this is like our actual invoice, our actual bill. And I've seen that high, I've seen that low. I saw this with the freight. I saw this with manufacturing. There is a wide range. Not everything is apples to apples at all. And I'm not just talking amount of SKUs. I'm not just talking picking and packing. I'm not just talking shipping. Through the entire process of making a board game with all the different materials and components and manufacturing processes and everything like that, and then the global logistics of distributing that several different packages to thousands and thousands of people across the entire world, it's a very complex thing, and every step of it, you can be charged high, you can be charged low, you can be taken advantage of, or you could not, right? And so there are definitely a lot of people, he's saying incompetence, I would say ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance in a negative connotation at all. I mean it in its true definition form, right? As there are just some things that we just don't know, that I don't know. I am ignorant in many, many different things. If I wanted to build a ship, I could not. I am ignorant when it comes to building a ship. That's not a negative on me. I've just never read about it. I don't know, right? Not my fault, right? So it's not stupid. It's just you just don't know, right? There's a lot of that. So there's a lot of ignorance in the industry, and people who just get a receipt, pay it, and don't think anything about it. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not, right? So there's a reason there's logistics companies that just handle this, right? So they have like their 3ML and stuff like that to handle just this. Okay. But that's kind of what he's saying. Now, he's saying it was tariffs, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But right here it says, let's talk about the false narratives of being fed to backers while inventories rot in warehouses, fully paid for by the very people being told we can't afford to ship your game. Okay, I actually fairly agree with that statement. I have said this many times. CMON, for instance, famously does this, like CMON specifically does, where when you manufacture a board game, one of the highest costs, for instance, is the miniatures. Now, the per mini cost of a miniature is like 3 cents. It's like nothing. It's pennies, literally pennies, right? But that's because you can buy a steel mold that costs $5,000 to $7,000, and you have a whole bunch of those. But each one can print 10,000 or so minis until you need to adjust it or get a new mold or something like that, right? And that's grossly simplifying it. There are many different materials you could use for the mold and all sorts of stuff, right? So you could piece them differently. Regardless, though, it's a big cost. But if, let's say, I sold 5,000. I had 5,000 backers, right? And its mini is printed once in each copy. And now I bought a steel mold for, X amount of dollars that can print 10,000 of that miniature. Well, I could print 5,000 more for almost no cost, just the cost of the plastic itself and a little bit of the process. Again, it's almost nothing for a little miniature. Well, I could always print extra, and you do to an extent. First of all, you don't give these factories like a precise amount. You do a rounding and stuff like that. But you want some for when you go to, Essenspiel, or you have them on your website, or maybe you have a retail edition, or maybe you just need a few to be able to send back if somebody has a damaged part that you kind of like butcher and take apart. And okay, that's where they get those minis and stuff. Either way, you make more, and the idea is the more is then sold on your website at an industry event, at a retail thing, something like that. CMON often does this, right? Where they have a game, but then they go to retail too. It's literally almost 50-50 when it comes to the retail versus the Kickstarter campaigns, or now GameFound campaigns. Their campaigns have typically been more revenue, but obviously there's some good profits in the retail, because guess who paid for that big expense? Guess who paid for that bulk order? Well, the backers did. So normally when you make a game, right? Let's say I have a box of, I'll actually use an actual example. Batman Gotham City Chronicles, right? 2 big boxes, $55 to manufacture. And I'm going to sell it for $120, right? Well, obviously, I have to take the 120 and then subtract 55 from that. That was the cost to actually make the game itself. Both big boxes, all the minis, all that stuff, right? That's a per unit thing. And of course, the more I print, the less per unit it is. But either way, let's say it's like $55. That's actually quite accurate, at least at one point in time. Now, if that's the case, that's still nice. But what if that 55 was paid for by backers? Backers who ordered it at a higher cost and ended up spending $500 on it, but then got all these little doodads and stuff like that. But you can still print that other and then sell that other copy. So now you can actually start your manufacturing process not in the red. Instead of it costing you money, you might actually already have made some profit, and then you get to sell that game on top of that. So that game, all those extra games are pure profit practically. It's literally just inventory already paid for by backers. Thank you so much for supporting the retail push for much of these games. I don't know if you did that, if you knew you were doing that or not, but you totally do, pretty much all the time. They can then just sell that, right? So all of those extra copies are just like chef's kiss, just an amazing business opportunity there, where people will pay for you to make the product that then you get to sell to somebody else anyway at full price, often even higher, right? So, and even if you don't, like a lot of retail deals, they obviously, if the retail for 150, those retailers did not pay 150, they pay much less, but you're still making money because it literally costs you nothing to make. So it's still all profit. You can afford to take a lower price point. You're still making good money, even on the retail, right? So it's actually a pretty slick deal, right? Okay, so yeah, that is a fairly true statement. By and large, there's nuance in it, of course. Not every company operates this way, but for the most part, any game you're seeing, at a booth and at an event, or even at a retail store, if it was on Kickstarter as well, if it was on GameFund as well, you can probably thank a backer for that copy. They probably paid for the manufacturing and shipment of that, right? Because they don't separate them in the freight either, right? When they're sitting in the freight, they're not like, oh no, this is all the backers. They're like, no, fill it up with all of it that we made extra of, and we'll just sell those for profit, right? So like it's definitely thanks to backers. All right. So then he goes and says that it's a masterclass in bad business. Again, this goes back to the hobbyist thing. There is a lot of times where not every developer is as smart in their business running as others. Some take a lot more risks. Some just don't know. Some are making, just bad decisions, like Final Frontier games definitely did, right? And we'll get to that as well. So here's the Final Frontier, Dead Before Arrival is what he says here. He says they blamed CMON. This is the exact video, by the way, I did, and I came to the same conclusion. They blamed the distributors, the economy, the unexpected circumstances, even game trays, all sorts of stuff. They blamed everyone but the people responsible themselves. I actually agree with the statement, and that was the statement I made in the video. The first word you see on the blame train is the word CMON, and really they should have put Frontier or Final Frontier as the first two words in the who's to blame here, because they just made a lot of bad decisions, and they had taken out a big loan, and they were borrowing from other campaigns. This is stuff they admitted on, right? All these bad business moves. And they communicated none of this risk to their backers. And now that the House of Cards has finally fallen, they're blaming CMON, right? Now, CMON may have been a piece of that puzzle, but the puzzle is we aren't running our business well, right? They're just hobbyists. They're not good business people. They don't know how to run a business in a safe way, and it shows up, right? But we only find out about it when they close up shop. Okay, scrolling down a little bit. He talks about CMON, he talks about all sorts of stuff, right? There's a lot there I'm going to skip. One of the things he talks about here is tariffs. The claim that he makes is that they are actually 20%. Obviously, that is not really what people are seeing. I'm not going to get too into that, mainly because by the time you watch this video a week from now, if you didn't, by the way, subscribe so you can see these videos as I post them, it will have changed, right? This is a very much a moving target, which is why a lot of the updates we're seeing from companies aren't too concerned. They're just like, we're just chilling. We're just wait. We'll delay the game a little bit, but that way we can still, go as a company, and you can get support in future amazing games that you help support, hopefully, right? So definitely though, people are seeing that bill higher. Now, what he claims is that they're not looking into the most favored nation status. They're not looking into all these different things. They're doing the wrong code. And while I don't think this is true, though again, I am no expert, so disclaimer there. Feel free to argue in the comments or whatever, I guess, or learn us. And I do have several developers have reached out to me, by the way. I've already scheduled 2 talks, or I've said I'm open to 2 talks. We're in the middle of seeing when I can talk to them, but I'm trying to get some research for you guys, and I'll let you know what I find out on what these companies are actually seeing. Like I said, often this allows me to see things that they can't publicly release, and then I can have that flavor my take on things, right? In other words, I can be like, well, I'm building off of this information that I have, and even though you can't legally have this information, like literally, like legally you can't, I can at least speak to some of the reasons and stuff like that. So hopefully that's some good help there. And by the way, if you're a developer and you've ever spoken to me, kind of anonymously or privately or off the books or whatever, I do appreciate it. It is very helpful, of course, because I know you can't just make an update spilling the beans on business deals. That's not how that works, right? But anyway, he claims it's only 20%. He's not delivering a game right now, though, either, right? So, it's whatever. A lot of times, and this is what I have found, like, again, from several conversations, and this isn't even just America. Ultimately, in fact, I hear this a lot in like Europe when it comes to like VATs and taxes and stuff like that, and import duties and whatnot, where a lot of countries outside of that, right? A lot of my patrons on Discord talked to me about this for many years, actually, that sometimes it just depends on who gets your box, right? And they can be a huge, like the actual person in charge at customs. They can either be a jerk, or they can just not care, or like the whole gamut. right? And so you can have a person who's like, nope, I'm putting it as this, it's whatever, right? And that's what you get. Now you have to pay more, or they're like, oh yeah, it's a gift, whatever, I don't care, and then they pass it along. So sometimes it really just depends on who's there that day. Like literally, it can come down to that. It's kind of crazy. Okay. Right here, he says they're not victims of policy; they're victims of their own ignorance. Again, yeah, he's just repeating kind of what he did before, except now he's using the word ignorance, which is, I think, a legitimate claim for a lot of creators. Not all of them. Some of them have done very good transitioning to business people, but not everybody has. All right. Then he talks about I can never say this, cephalofares, like 4 million tariff kind of thing. They went on CNN, had an interview talking about it, right? And again, with his information on tariffs that he's claiming, he gets different numbers, so he talks about that. But one thing he does talk about, right, is something like this. They don't cite a single invoice. Again, that's typically something that you can't do. And the reason and the reason they do this, so, and like, I know this is the case. I've talked in depth about this with several developers, is because different companies get different deals. They get different deals from the factories. They get different deals from the freight partners. They get different deals for the logistics companies, from the warehouses, everything. I'll explain this kind of simply, I guess. When it comes, let's say you run a factory in China, and you have 80 printers that are printing, I don't know, the cardboard boxes, I guess. And you have this great business deal with Walmart, and they're constantly making their great value stuff. And, you're just printing those things out every single month, month after month, year after year. You've been a long-term partner with them. And then let's say this board game company comes and says, hey, I have a one-time 10,000 unit order, and that's it. You will never be able to use those files again. You'll never be able to use those molds again. You'll never be able to use any of those. Those are now, that's all mine, and you just have to do all this work for this one-off. How happy are they going to be with that when it comes to getting you a deal versus Walmart a deal? Obviously, you're going to be charged different things. So the quantity, whether or not you have repeat orders, like a retail order, stuff like that, all of that can matter on the price that you get charged. Now, let's say you show up and you start talking business jargon. You definitely, you show up like an expert, like one of, the lackeys at Walmart, some office dude that like knows all of the stuff about it, right? And they're obviously gonna be like, hey, this guy like knows what he's talking about, right? Versus the person that is just going, hey, how much is it? I don't even know what the process is, right? Like, it's very easy to charge that person more, right? Because if nothing else, in a non like malicious way, you're probably going to have to pick up more of the slack, right? Because it means you might have to explain things to them more. They might have more questions. They might ask for things that don't even make sense, right? There's all this other kind of, they might give it to you in the wrong file format and all this other stuff. It could be an extra cost to your business. So I'm not even saying they're definitely malicious. I'm just saying that it is kind of a used car salesman kind of vibe, right? And that's for every single piece of the puzzle, right? One of the things he's constantly talking about is you don't cite an invoice. And the problem is, again, I have seen several invoices from different stages of it, and more often than not, they have a little thing on there like, do not show other people. And that's because you might be getting a better deal. Ignorance is bliss, right? They're like, this is a deal for you. Mythic Games, you got a deal. Come on, you got a deal. This is your invoice, your price, and it has no relativity to another company, maybe even ordering something that you would think is apples to apples, right? And so this person from High Noon cannot know what I can never say that. I don't know. Why do you make names hard? I can barely talk as it is when I get excited like this, guys. Let's give it a 2 syllables, please. Maybe 3 max. Anyway. They don't know what other companies are getting, right? And because just because you even use the same factory, the same shipping part, none of that actually even matters. You can still be charged more. And so what you see is some companies, they seem to be doing pretty okay. And often it's because they're just better at the business side of it, the back end side of it that you guys don't see. And some companies like, this is like terrible. I can't do this. And it's because they're getting a raw deal. Like legitimately, they may be paying 2-3 times as much, right? There are different upsells. There's different services that can do it. A ton. Like even the freight can take on so many other things that are then added to that bill. So your freight cost is not actually only paying for your freight. It's paying for all sorts of other things, right? So either way, there's a lot there. Okay, we're going to go on. All right, so one of the things he says here is meaning backers paid for the entire production run. Again, this is often the case, right? It literally does happen quite often where you made enough to make everything you need to for both backers and retail, and you haven't even sold the stuff at retail yet. That's on top of it, right? This is something that's been happening for as long as this has been running pretty much, right? Or at least as long as, again, CMON, I think, really worked well in normalizing this is a campaign, but it's also going to be in retail later, right? And anytime that happens, or anytime they have a whole bunch of, maybe they have these, you see these giant booths at, all these, like Eschenspiel and stuff, right? PAX Unplugged, all these things. That's where that product comes from, right? Like they just made it with everything else. They didn't make a whole separate one. Hey, factory, could you stop your printers and print 100 of these for me? No, they're not even going to talk to you unless it's 1,000, right? So yeah, that's actually true. It's so what he's saying here, and this is an interesting point. I'm not necessarily against this, though. Again, there's nuance here. Whatever that company is. I swear I can never say their name. They're essentially saying, like, hey, we had all this project, we can't ship it, right? What this is really affecting is companies that are ready to ship now, that are on the boats now coming into there. Anybody who was on a boat that hadn't reached the port yet, where they're going to get hit with the tariffs, they're the ones that are really hurting from this. Most others can just kind of pause, just kind of wait. Now, there are warehouse costs. It's not free, right? None of that's there. Maybe they're just waiting to click print. That can happen too, though. Again, things can age. There are contracts involved, stuff like that. But either way, they can just wait. This is really people that are either about to deliver or are delivering. That's who's getting hit. So that's what they said is, hey, we have all this product, right? And he says, so what's sitting in that overseas warehouse right now? Free product, fully funded by backers, unsold inventory, printed on spec, ready to be sold at 100% profit margin. Again, yes and no. Often you're not doing this blindly. You have already done a deal with retailers. You're under contract, right? One of the things Final Frontier even said that he covered before is, and this is why it's never black and white like this, right? Is, hey, we made all these, but it's because CMON was going to buy them and then didn't. Now that's, again, bad on them for making something and not taking any money from it and having them be able to walk out. That's a garbage contract. But either way, like that's the idea. And maybe it was only if they delayed, and because they delayed, then they're like, we're not seeing the contract. We're not seeing the clauses, obviously, right? But yeah, they probably didn't just make it. They probably already had somebody signed up to sell this, right? Which means that they, hey, I'm expecting this in September. I'm going to put it on my shelf because I'm a friend of a local gaming store and I want this to be able to sell. I've already actually done a launch event for it, or who knows what, or I have people pre-ordering it. I used to pre-order through my friend of a local gaming store all the time because I was able to support them. They often got a better deal at the Kickstarters that I was already going to be backing anyway. It was a great deal, right? So there's all this other stuff, all these other companies involved, all these contracts and logistics involved. It's not as simple as saying that, but to an extent, he is right that when it comes to the worst case scenario of or the bare minimum of I had to make this for the person I'm selling and it's a 1-to-1 and they've already paid me. That's the worst case. This isn't necessarily quite as bad because they didn't start in the red, right? They started in the black already. They're already making money, so they should have the money to be able to handle something like that. Now, again, does that equal 145% tariffs? I don't know, right? Like that I get the issue there, but it's also not quite as bad as it may seem. So he says here, if you only had 10,000 to 15,000 backers for Gloomhaven's second edition, why print 60,000 units? Because you were planning on selling them the rest of retail, probably to distributors, maybe to big box stores, probably to Target. But the key here is the backers didn't just pay for their own games. They bankrolled Cephalofair's, I got it, entire retail inventory. Again, that's often at least somewhat true. Again, it may not always equal out totally. It depends on everything you're doing, right? But yeah, it's certainly not as risky as making a product, not selling any of them, and then hoping they sell in retail, right? It's the risk is gone, right, for you. This is pretty much everything you're shipping in has pretty much been accounted for. Okay, now this is an interesting take here. So this is what could have they done said, because essentially what Cephalofair is saying is we just are not dealing with the US right now, right? Shipped only the 10 to 15 backer copies to the US. This is an important thing, right? As a backer, you see the campaign, you see what happened, and Now, there can be 0 to a bajillion% business deals outside that you are not aware of, that you don't know, right? There are whole Chinese campaigns on specific campaigns that are like, not even Chinese even, but other language-based things, kind of like Kickstarter. There are whole other campaigns that they can run you may not even be aware of, right? This happens often too. And Limbo Eternal War, for instance, did this, where they had a whole Chinese campaign just for China that, again, like nobody was like super made aware of that was even a thing, right? All the retail deals, all the other distribution deals, IP deals, all sorts of stuff, right, can happen outside of that. And so as a backer, you can have an opinion, but can't force them to follow this, where it's, hey, why don't you just make what you need to for me, for us? We backed this campaign, just worry about us. And then later, if you have more, that's fine, do whatever you want. That is actually something that you could push for, you could ask for. Now, whether they'll follow, I don't know. But it does make it a little bit easier. Yes and no, right? So obviously, there's less there, so that would affect something like tariffs or freight, right, that you're shipping out. What it does hurt is the fact that now they only have that pool, whereas often the case, if things do go bad and they're able to pull from the retail deal that they had. They're able to pull from all these other things, even sometimes other campaigns, right, to help fulfill your game, right? So it's smaller in scope and therefore smaller in risk, but it also does prevent some deals from happening that they would have normally done, and some efficiencies and costs as well, right? Stored the rest in the overseas warehouse and chill, imported in small waves, or shipped regionally to other markets, waited out the tariff situation, keep their promises. Again, the waiting out the tariff situation is actually what a lot of companies are doing. I'm going to roll back to the I get paid to solve problems at work thing that I kind of mentioned really early on when I mentioned incident reports. Ultimately, there's a problem here, and there are many things, many variables you can tweak and you can pursue and you can work on to try and get things working right. This is the case for pretty much every problem in your entire life, right? Whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's a project, whether it's a hobby, whether it's a business, right? All of that is fine just to work on. And so this 4 bullet point, there's actually way more than even that. There are tons of things you can pursue, right? There's just no mention of that. Essentially, they've chosen to just say, actually, we're just going to chill, right? And a lot of companies are saying that, and that's fine. I think that's a legitimate way to do, especially with the ever-changing thing. Though, again, it could go up too. So, like, maybe, maybe waiting isn't the best. You just never know. It is kind of a risky move, right? But so is this whole thing where you're taking money and then delivering later, right? Either way, a lot you can work on. Okay, right here he says it plain as and simple, because this industry isn't built on business, it's built on hobbyists. For the most part, that's true. I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. There are benefits to that, and there are things that aren't good for that. I have been gaming and video games since I was very young, and so I remember when video game companies were ran by the video gamers, right? Where you would see the CEO, and it's the young guy who coded the first game, right? And so they were very much for gamers, right? They knew what a video gamer was because they are video gamers, right? You didn't have the Bobby Koticks and stuff like that out there that like are just people who run businesses and their business is money, right? And so I saw the shift that video games took as an industry, where that became less and less common, except for indies nowadays. So even then, a lot of times they get attached to all sorts of different, groups and stuff like that. But either way, slowly but surely, the business people came, and their business is business. And they made a lot more money and often ran a much safer business. Not always. It depends. Big business is stupid too. But because they're on the business side of things, but it also hurt the end product, I think, a lot as well. And so when you look at older games, right, we were even, looking at like Oblivion and stuff like that as kind of a great example of like way back when we had all this and what do we have now and stuff like that, right? And so the board games, kind of the same things. I'm okay having hobbyists call the shots, but at the same time, that's more risky. All right, so finally, all of this to say he's trying to sell you a book, right? So, like, cutting back here, there's some ulterior motives there. By the way, I have a book coming. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. there's a lot wrong in this article. So I'm going to link to it. Feel free to read through it. Just don't take me at face value. Don't take him at face value. Don't take the companies at face value, right? But especially anybody who has an ulterior motive, right? Or is saying something with like strong conviction. All right. If it's that much, either they know exactly what they're talking about, or they're full of hot air. Right. It's typically one or the other. Just keep your brain on. Now, my viewers, I know you guys are super smart. You guys don't just blindly follow what I say. I love you for that. Thank you for thinking for yourselves, having your own opinions. I think that's great. And of course, we can all be mature about it when we disagree. But I think there are some good tidbits there to remember. Right? Is that these companies, when we go through this in the future, and we're going to see companies fail, we're going to see companies do just fine, and there is a reason for that, and it's often just because the other one's better at running a business, right? They don't have 10 campaigns of $22 million out, to still deliver. Where a sudden spike in tariffs just ruin everything, right? And you have to fire, half your company and stuff like that, right? Or, oh no, CMON didn't buy our stuff and we already borrowed from the bank, and so now we gotta close shop, right? So there are companies that are brittle. There are companies that are quite robust. None of them are affluent, none of them are crazy. At the end of the day, these are all fairly small companies, and just trying to make board games. So I guess try and not look at things so black and white, right? Just because a company closed doesn't mean it's because they're malicious. They could just be ignorant. I think sometimes people get stuck in a rut, or I guess that sounds like no problem. They get stuck and focused on the things that aren't as important as the big deal, which is the safety and integrity of backers getting their product, right? And then if every business decision was based on how much risk it adds to that delivery, I think a lot of different business decisions would be made for the vast majority of these companies. If they viewed their promise to you of a product in higher regard, if they put more behind the money that you gave them as a free loan to your business, a business of all things, whether it's ran by a hobbyist or not, taking that into account anytime you're making a decision, I think would improve at least future decisions going forward. So if you're a developer, I don't know, try and think about that a little bit more often. If you're a backer, just realize that there's all sorts of side deals you have no idea about, and we won't know unless they can't hide it. And careful with CMON. Though it sounds like I don't have to worry about that anymore because they're not going to be making campaigns. I have one question for you at the end of this now. I know this has been a long video. Thank you for sticking around, by the way. If you found it helpful, obviously a like or subscribe helps for that. Or comment, let me know. But I do have a question. Do you think that CMON will make another campaign again? Ever? Do you think this is the nail in the coffin? That after they let all these designers and developers and artists and all the creatives go, and it's just the business people that got in this situation in the first place running it, right? To deliver, and the people needed to deliver their 10 campaigns or so. Do you think they'll ever be able to hire back on some developers, launch a campaign, successfully fund it, and get back to where they were? Or is this the course change? Is this the sail off to the sunset that they're headed towards? I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know. Comments below. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Again, I know this was a lot. I apologize. Hopefully you found it helpful. Hopefully I was able to explain things enough. Things are linked down below. If you need to look for yourself, please do. And let me know if you hear any news of anything. I'm all ears. All right, take care, guys. Bye.